So now that we are using promises to get data, that's perfectly fine. But Observable has a lot more power than a promise. So I want to convert my promises into observables. So I want to, instead of returning promises from my services, I want to be able to return observables from all of my services. That's just a decision I make right now. So instead of sending back a promise right here, I want to wrap it inside an observable and return that observable. Now there are a few ways to do it. You can do it very simple, I'll show you that in the next lesson, but you can actually also go in manually and create a new observable and in there handle the different then, catch, and finally methods, and how do you want to trigger some events in your observables. So let's try it out. What I'm going to do first is just jump to my drawing right here. I need to somehow trigger the event. That's what we did when we called the promise. I need to listen for changes inside the then event. I need to listen for errors in the catch event, and in the end I need to just tell I'm completely done, right? So these are kind of the goals that I need to complete inside my observable. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, the observable itself will never be triggered. It will never be triggered until I do something called .subscribe. So that pretty much means that that's the first main difference right here. An observable will not be triggered until we call subscribe, where up here the promise was triggered right away, okay? So we are going to figure out how we can make that trigger that subscribe event right there. The second thing you need to know is that we are going to add inside the subscribe, we're going to add next, we're going to add error, and we're going to add complete, right? To kind of, if you notice, they're actually the same things that you have up here. Then will be the next, so this guy, the then part will be the next, right? Error will be the catch, and complete will be the finally. So that's kind of the setup we need to make. But how do we actually do it in code? So how do we actually map this promise into an observable? Let's try and check it out. So step one is I'm going to return an observable, so I probably need to somehow return observable. And the observable, you can create an observable very simple just by calling a create function. There we go. Now I have an observable that I can return. That was very simple. But I still need to define actually in my observable how I want to manage all these different functions, right? I need to explain that when then is being hit, I want to call the next. When catch, I want to call the error. When complete, finally, I want to call the complete. So how do we do that? Well, the cool thing is when you are creating an observable, you can actually, using a Lambda expression right here, you can actually go in and get access to that observable before it's created to kind of set up some code for the observable. So what I want to do is kind of explain to the system that when something is triggered with my promise, I want to call next, for instance, right? So I could do it like this. And that pretty much means that then is being called in the promise, then I want to call next. Let's try and do it in the code for real. So I'm still going to make this call right here. Youpsie, there we go. Call is being made. And then I want to use, just like we did in the UI last lesson, I want to use the then function. And with the then function, I'm getting back nothing. I already know that. But what I want the then function to do for me is call the observable next function, right? Whoops, not network, but next. That's pretty much all I want the then function to do. Since I'm not returning anything anyway, I just want to call the next function. Okay, so now I've mapped that when I call then in the promise, I want to call the next in the observable. And again, it might look stupid that you're converting this from a promise to an observable, but again, with this setup, I can actually start using the observables to add pipes and do crazy conversion of my data if needed later on. So that's kind of the power in my mind. So what else do I want to do? Well, what should happen if I call catch? Well, then I'll get back an error, and luckily an observable contains a function called error where I can put in that error that I just created. Okay, so that's the next function now. So now I'm saying that in case of then, I want to call the observable's next function. If I call a catch, I want to call the error function, and then let's put in the final one, which is the finally. So when I hit the finally function, it's not going to return anything, but I want to call the observable's complete function, right? There we go. So that should be pretty much it. Now I've converted my promise right here into an observable, right? There's still one thing I need to do because right now I'm not expecting an observable in my component. So let's jump back to the component and I'll get an error. Because the delete product does not return an observable anymore, it actually returns a delete product does not return a promise, it returns an observable. So I need to, instead of doing this, I need to subscribe. Okay, that's how we do it. But let me try and show you something. This is pretty important stuff. So I'll do a const right here, and this will just be an observable, right? And then I'll subscribe to that observable right here. There we go. So the reason that I just want to two-line this is because then I can put the debugger in here. So before I execute the observable, I just want to show you guys something very important. There we go. So let's just try and run this code now and see what happens when I actually call the delete. I hit my delete button. Let's just delete one of these new products. I hit my observable right here, okay? And I called the delete product. And before, when I used the promise, you have to remember, as soon as I clicked that button, the event was sent right away. It was sent instantly. So the event was triggered and I got a reply, okay? I couldn't stop that, I couldn't do anything. But that's not the case now. If you notice, the delete product, so that means product with this ID, still exists on Firebase. 5Q, blah, 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 it's right there. So it's not deleted yet, it's not triggered yet. All I've done is I've created an observable, but the code is not executed. Very important. Promises execute as soon as you trigger it, as soon as you create it actually. But observables, they don't trigger until you call subscribe. Important information. So I've only set up information about how I now want to use this promise. That's all I've done right here, but I haven't actually triggered the observable yet. So only the information about how the observable would work when I do subscribe. I have not triggered any code yet. But as soon as I do the subscribe right here, let me just try and step over a couple of times, and you'll see as soon as I do the subscribe, come on, show yourself. There we go. Step over. Here comes the subscribe. Boom! That triggered the code right away. So let's just continue right here. And boom, I got the event information that this item was deleted, right? So that's very important to know. Now we've converted our beautiful, beautiful promise right here. This guy we have right here, that's a promise. We've actually converted that into an observable and returned that observable. So let's end the lesson right here. Now you've kind of seen the idea behind a promise compared to an observable. Next lesson I'll show you some easier way to do this so you don't have to manually go and write all this code yourself. See you next time. Have fun.